It's me, Billy McGonagall. I'm eating a sandwich here.
How many copyrights can we violate on our way to watch the copyright violating movie?
That's right, yeah. Well, hey, everybody. I wasn't planning on doing this, but we just had a really good conversation about it. I want to have that conversation again. So we're going to do a Grimdark Media about we just watched Heretic, I think.
I feel like, you decide what your overlay looks like, but I feel like we should preface this by just straight up saying, hopefully if you're hypersensitive about your religious beliefs, you won't be offended by what's going to be discussed.
Yeah.
Because that's not the goal.
Nope.
Also not the goal of the movie, by the way.
No, not the goal of the movie at all.
But yeah, just be aware. Like, I don't know how content warning stuff works.
Yeah, I don't either.
This feels like one of those things where there could be people that we're not trying to offend.
And it's really funny because I think that because of the nature of this movie, some people who could interact with it aren't going to interact with it because they think it's going to be heavy-handed one way or the other about religion, and it really isn't.
And that's the big thing. It's not heavy-handed one way or the other,
which is so interesting.
But because so much of it, and I won't get ahead of ourselves, but because so much of it is left open to interpretation, if you have a predisposed point of view, you may see it one way or the other instead of seeing the ambiguity. And I think the ambiguity is the best part of the movie.
So yeah, a quick plot synopsis for everybody. So yeah, content warning and also, of course, spoiler warning because we're going to spoil everything that happens.
You have to spoil the crap out of this movie to talk about it.
Yeah. But it can actually be summarized pretty quickly. This is the story of two Mormon missionaries who are being catfished by a serial killer who gets off on control and collects people of faith, basically, into his dark little dungeon.
Yeah, he's basically trying to destroy or rewrite their existing
That's
faith.
right. By
whatever faith they are to begin with.
By giving them a massive, tense history lesson about the emergence of religion in human culture. All the way back to the Eleusinian mysteries, like at the very beginning, the most basic, like tribal festivals, celebrating like the solstices and, the coming of like winter and spring and stuff like that, up until modern religion basically takes over, which is what they are part of, right? They're Mormon missionaries, they're on mission. We have three characters, three primaries, and a Topher Grace.
That's
made me so happy. I didn't realize it was Topher Grace.
Topher Grace, and it is funny because Topher Grace being the white-haired old man, it's like Topher Grace playing Matthew Modine from Stranger Things or something. It's so weird.
It's Topher Grace playing the lead singer of Weezer is what I immediately thought of.
Wait. Is this a prequel to that 70s show? Is Topher Grace playing Red when Red was slightly younger?
Young Red. Young Red Foreman.
I just inceptioned myself.
You did just inception yourself. It's got a pretty decent runtime. I think it's just over 2 hours. It didn't feel too long or too short.
No,
right.
It felt just right.
And the idea is basically that these two Mormon missionaries, they're in very different places. And I think that's important for the story. One is a veteran Mormon missionary. She's got about 8 or 9 recruits into the Mormon church. The other one's fresh, brand new to the mission and has 0. And they've been given a list of households who've requested a visit, basically to learn more about.
And the early engagement between the two, and this is important because this will become a huge part of the story as the story moves forward, and slowly over time. Like it's not a flip, but is the early interactions before the real events of the movie start. The two of them are very much depicted like Sister Barnes, who appears to be the more experienced. I'm not going to say older because they look about the same age. Yeah. But Sister Barnes, she's obviously coming to the end of her faith in the church, if not her faith in her set of beliefs. Yeah. Whereas Sister Paxton is very much portrayed as being as full of unquestioning belief as someone can possibly be. So the early exchanges between the two of them, they're not tense, they're not awkward, but you can see this unbridled optimism in Sister Paxton and this unbridled sadness in Sister Barnes.
Yeah, and they're coming to it from really different reasons because Sister Barnes is coming to it from this place of trauma where she had her father die and her mother basically found solace in community and the religion that they adopted. Whereas Sister Paxton was raised in the church. So she's coming her whole life basically. Yeah. And it's like their ships going opposite directions, moving past each other.
They're literally at the middle point.
They're at the middle point in their faith. And then we have our Hugh Grant in his like weird little creep like opus. Like he is living his best weird little creep life, and I'm so here.
So I love
it so much.
I will try to minimize the amount of times I use the phrase. We just talked about this off camera because we literally just had like a 45-minute discussion about this.
We watched the whole thing.
But Hugh Grant is really leaning into a performance that is for people who never liked Hugh Grant as an actor. Yeah. It's like he's playing a guy that it's a 90s version of Hugh Grant looking at the camera, winking and saying, "It's all just an act."
That's right. Remember
The nice
how
guy,
much you hated me?
the nice awkward British man.
He did this in The Gentleman too,
Yes.
right? Where he was just this like gross reporter, this like tabloid salesman, basically.
But
and,
the
like,
veneer over the surface of it is literally 90s Hugh
is
Grant.
90s Hugh Grant, yeah, and it's slowly cracking and falling off. And this is a mid-budget A24 horror movie, and of course, I will stand for A24 forever because they are doing this thing where they became sort of my port in the storm for horror that was, people say elevated. I think of it as being you're working inside your restrictions, and so you have like almost an Agatha Christie play where it takes place in a single room for the most part, and you're in a bottle episode of TV, right? It's one location, 3 actors. Topher Grace like kind of coming in and out a little bit, like he was the Scatman Crothers in The Shining. Sort of showed up to
He
help.
was the Sean Bean of Silent Hill.
Yeah, you're right. He was Sean Beaning it a little bit, yeah.
And if I can just editorialize a bit on the whole, your take on the A24 movies, I think this is a great reinforcement for just movies in general, that, you know, good writing elevates a movie. It doesn't have to be a massive visual spectacle. You don't need to spend a ton of money on effects shots to tell a good story. Mm-hmm. And this is a great story told extremely well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when we meet them, basically they're knocking on the door. They're at that point. They're kind of talking to each other.
They have a list of
locals.
people they're supposed to follow up with who have asked to speak to someone about the church.
Yeah. This is their last one during the day. So they are like at the end of their long bike ride around. It looks like Colorado. I'm pretty sure it's some mountain town in Colorado is what it looked like.
Yeah, I think they referenced that at some point. To be honest, it looks a ton like Vancouver too. Like
it could be either.
I wonder why.
Tax credits.
Yeah, exactly.
Tax credits.
Why
galore.
does this place look so much like Vancouver?
Yeah. But it's in the mountains, and a big storm begins. And we effectively get our like Hateful Eight moment where they're invited indoors. They say they can't go inside without a woman being present. It's just one of their rules for mission. And he says, "My wife's just in the other room. Does that count?" And then right from the very beginning, you can feel a tension, right? They get drawn into this.
I think you're wrong, because I think he's being very nice. He's being very kindly, because he even says to them, "Oh, just the house has metal in the walls and the ceiling, so if you're not comfortable with that." He's so nice. I don't know what you're seeing. You're just wrong.
He's telegraphing all of how evil he is right from the beginning, and it's playing upon their naive desire to want to have this conversation with him inside the house. And you as the audience are noticing it, and it feels gross. And I'm not going to go through the whole process, because if people do want to watch this, I think it's worth revealing things over time.
And the problem with summarizing it is the pacing is key to what makes it so good.
Yeah. The slow unveiling of sort of like who he is and how weird the situation is going to get, I think is an important part of the movie. So short story long, they're drawn further and further into the house. The house itself is basically, it's Home Alone trapped to keep them ever from going backwards. They're forced further and further into this almost like religious nave that he's built, a tabernacle, but it's all him espousing his atheistic beliefs through explaining the history of religions and the way that some religions iterate on each other. They have common themes and common imagery, common stories.
And he
plots.
doesn't present himself as an atheist. Like, that's the message. He presents himself as being a religious scholar who's very knowledgeable about a lot of different religions, which is why he has, again, invited them in. So it's, again, he has this veneer over the whole thing. Like, there's a reason for him to have other beliefs, but for him to legitimately want to converse with them.
Yeah, and his sort of like thesis at the beginning is, I'm looking for the right one for me.
The one
true religion. That's it. He's looking for the one true religion that is the right one for him to have as his like core belief set. And so I think this is really interesting, because what it does is it creates like a motive for them to stay. No matter how uncomfortable it gets, no matter how weird he becomes, no matter how many weird stories he tells them,
and that's the thing,
parallels he does,
it creates a framework for them to be drawn into these conversations, right? Like, there's all these moments where you as the outside observer would think, no, that's not right. Mm-hmm. But because he's laid this groundwork, there's reasons for them to continue re-engaging with him.
Yeah. And because Sister Paxton is so agreeable and so eager to get her first sort of like commission into the church, and because for other reasons, Sister Barnes is so sort of like, she's objectively defiant. She rejects a bunch of his like objective criticisms and history lessons as being reductive, which they were, and almost on purpose inflammatory to try and get a rise out of her. They go deeper and deeper and deeper into this place until they end up in the basement.
And it's interesting, right? Because again, we've started off with the context that Sister Barnes is the one whose faith is probably in the process of breaking.
Yeah.
But she's the one who has the lowest tolerance for his being disrespectful of other people's faith, which I thought was an amazing touch.
Yeah, it's really well done. And it culminates in not a ton of violence, if I'm being honest. This isn't a horror movie from the point of view of like gore or trauma. There is a bit of violence in it and there's some blood, but mostly it's that the imagery is unsettling and the themes of like death, rebirth, and challenging the idea of like the miraculous nature of religion and faith is used to try and manipulate these two girls into not necessarily abandoning their faith, but into telling him he's right. Ultimately, it seems like the goal of this serial killer is to get them to give in to what he's saying and admit he's correct. And the entire game, they live as long as they live because of how long it takes them to get there in the end. To the point where in the final confrontation, only one of them leaves alive and may or may not have witnessed an actual miracle when it's all said and done. And this is where it becomes really compelling. And the movie doesn't take a stance.
No. Which is great.
On one side or the other. And it's funny because it's why I think this is an objectively masterfully written movie, is it provides you with image with context that you can interpret multiple ways, multiple different layers all the way down. It could be hallucinatory. It could be completely explained by objective reality. It could be miraculous and something that only they can see. And you're never proselytized to as to like what the actual reason is.
And I think to what you were talking about the lack of the low volume, let's say, of the violence is, again, you go back to, movies of the 20s, 30s, 40s. This movie does an amazing job of being more of a suspense movie than a horror movie in a lot of ways, because the fear of what will happen next, and it's not because there's constantly the threat of physical violence, but the fear of what the outcome from the next moment could be always looms larger than the actual violence itself. Like one moment, and this is spoiler free, but the one moment that I would say early on where the girls look the most frightened is the fact that they have to open a door and walk down a staircase. And there's no reason to believe anything horrible is there, but it could be.
It's literally the fear of the dark basement.
Yeah.
It's literally the fear of like the unknown down in the bottom of a stairwell. And it's funny because once again, I think that is... We're entering an era where you cannot get $1 billion to make a movie anymore, nor should you. And I think what's happening is writing is commensurately getting better again because of it. Because you basically have to take what are effectively stage plays and produce them into film to get a good movie on the budget you want to have that movie on. And it's so good when they get it right that you feel, and it's funny because even when they don't get it as right, it's still better sometimes than having to suspend your disbelief to these giant spectacles that just don't mean anything anymore.
So movie studios have spent 20 years trying to remove from you, the audience member, the obligation to imagine anything, right? Like the goal is to show every single thing. And, and sometimes you'll look at something and be like, oh, that's cool. That looks amazing. That looks great. And other times it literally pulls the whole soul out of the movie because you're not interpreting anything. You're just walking through an art gallery and you're not even stopping to look at the paintings, right? When you spend less on your visual effects and your writing is this tight, like, here's the thing, the very last character who dies in the movie, you don't see them die at all, but there's no question that that's what's happened, right? And you're shown enough to understand exactly what's happened. Like not the outcome, but the exact event, but you don't see the exact event because you don't need to. So this is kind of back to you using your imagination. And, people talked about this a lot in classic horror movies back in I'd say even the pre-Hammer horror days, that whatever you imagine is far worse than whatever they were going to put on screen anyway. And this is a return to that.
I think the most famous example of that historically is Jaws, where they couldn't get the shark to work. And so instead, one of the magic tricks that Spielberg plays is he cuts around this non-functioning prop that you would have to, and then has you imagine it by doing POV camera, by having John Williams' incredible score basically announce the presence of the shark and have you know it's around. And not being able to see the shark actually makes its final third act reveal when you do see it so much more impactful because it has meaning that it's finally arrived as you've built the suspense basically for the first 90 minutes of like the first 2 acts of the movie. And to me, I think that's where this movie really shines, is if you're willing to be patient with it and not. And actually, I think one of the things I enjoyed the most about it was every time I thought it was going, you said this too, actually off camera, every time I thought it was going to be about something or evangelize something or take a stance, it immediately pulled that rug out from under me. And I was like, oh, you're so clever, movie. Oh, you're so clever, movie. Like I didn't really know what he wanted until the very end.
And just so we're clear, because we keep using the term evangelize, and what we mean is it doesn't evangelize its point pro or con. We're not just talking about it doesn't make a firm statement on its stance on religion or belief or faith or any of that stuff. It also doesn't make any clear stance against that, which is, again, it's what makes the movie work so well.
They're picked because of their beliefs, but their beliefs aren't the point of the movie.
No, not at all.
And I think that's the really key thing here is it could very easily be taken as like a pro or anti-religious message. And I think it's ambiguous on purpose so that no matter what your personal belief is going into the film, you can take away from it that the story was the conflict between those two stances, but was what the story was about, not the actual meaning of either of those two things.
If you're able to take your own personal beliefs and just sort of move them to the side while you're watching this movie, you'll have a better experience. And it's not about, ignore whatever it is you believe either way, so you're not offended or you're not bought into one side or the other. But you'll see so many more layers if you're not looking at it through that filter.
And you'll understand his monstrousness actually not having anything to do with faith or religion at the end of it all, because what it boils down to is his need for control. And his victims are being picked because of their beliefs, but he doesn't actually believe in anything.
No.
Before or against it, he just wants to have this like cadre of people.
There is that moment at the end, though. There is that in joke about there being no atheists in foxholes, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. There is that moment. Yeah, because what happens
when he's dying?
Oh, that's and she starts praying for him and everybody else at the end and saying that like she basically the last survivor is Sister Barnes.
No, it's not. It's Sister Paxton.
Sister Paxton, sorry. Yeah, I got them reversed again. Bill Paxton. I'm just gonna have that in my
Bill
head.
Paxton is never the final survivor of anything. Final survivor.
That's why I'm having a problem with it. And because she thinks that she's dying, she begins to pray after telling him a story. Because you've thought for the entire film that she is a true believer in the sense that like she's unquestionably looking at this stuff. She's also the first to capitulate to telling him what he wants to hear, which is really interesting.
And again, there's enough of that back and forth that it immediately gets away from depicting any of these three characters as caricatures.
Yeah. They're very nuanced. They're very like they all have like a development. You get to see different layers.
I saw the movie before Ash, and when I texted Ash, I mentioned to him that there's going to be moments where it feels like it's going to lean into tropiness, and it never does. Like it always gets almost there and then pulls away.
Well, I think what's interesting is the characters are 3-dimensional.
Yes.
Right? You see their initial 2D image at the beginning of the film, but by the end of the movie, the circumstances have rotated all of them into new shapes that you did not expect to be in. All three of them. And in particular, Sister Paxton at the end is far more observant, far more aware, and far smarter and sort of like cannier than you expect her to be.
But the story she tells him at the very end makes it crystal clear, because she knew that from the beginning, the story she's telling. She knew that before the movie ever started. So it makes it really clear that she's a far more intelligent, worldly, wise person than you had been led to believe up until that moment.
Yeah, because your impression at the beginning is that she is blindly faithful.
She's naive. Yeah.
Right? She was brought up in a devoutly religious family, and she's blindly faithful. But by the end, she's telling him a story. So we've come to this in a circular way. As she's laying dying, and he's laying dying, because everyone's been horrifically injured. And he's crawling towards her to try and kill her. She's telling him a story about how they did a study about 2 separate focus groups of people who were in recovery, and some were being prayed for and some weren't, and that had absolutely no impact on the outcome of the results, whether they would live or die. They had the same terminal illness or whatever. There was no statistical like benefit. And she's saying that she knows all of this, and she's telling him she knows all of this, and it just doesn't matter to her because her faith doesn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Her faith is that it's nice to have someone pray for you, and it gives you comfort and love and support. And he's hearing this while he's crawling towards her.
With a box cutter.
With a box cutter. That's right. And then, but at the same time, you can see that giving him comfort. You can literally see him taking comfort in this as she starts to pray.
Yeah, he's gurgling about prayer as he's creeping up on her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so there's a really interesting moment at the end where they've had this kind of like funny moment, and then there's a literal miracle that happens. Or not, because we watch Sister, I'm gonna say right, Barnes this time.
Yeah, so they're told
her throat cut.
They are told very early on that in the room that they are now finishing the movie in.
Yeah.
That they're going to see a miracle. They're going to see a resurrection.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the movie, maybe that's what you see, or maybe it's just science.
And it's entirely possible that it's one of the
It can be, yeah, it can be both.
Yeah, and so I think that the interesting thing is that we have no real definitive answers about anything at the end of it, except that this guy was a monster preying on people because of their beliefs. And we get challenged from top to bottom, basically, by us interpreting it over and over again, and then having our interpretation in the moment be challenged almost like 3 minutes later by the movie.
And if I can, I know we said we wouldn't get hyper specific, but one of the things that I told you I loved about the movie, and I do have to bring it up, is, historically when you talk about examples of atheists talking about religion and why they think the truly faithful have been duped or believed, it usually comes down to some false prophet or false messiah performing a magic trick to fool them into being faithful. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite moments in this movie is this guy who is this, committed atheist to shattering their belief, when he questions Sister Paxton how he could have possibly faked that miracle. She points out that it's a magic trick. And it's a complete reversal of how you would normally see that depicted in horror or suspense or any kind of mass media. It was really good.
Yeah. He has one of his previous victims basically eat a poison pie, and then while they're distracted, switch the body for one of his other victims who looks almost identical and have them come back to life, so that they think that they've witnessed a miracle of resurrection, right? And like this whole idea that they're being manipulated the entire time isn't actually predicated upon their specific religious beliefs. And I think that's the mistake that people who don't choose to see this movie might make, is thinking it's an indictment of a specific religion.
No,
it has nothing to do with that, because he hits everybody. It does not. It just has to do with the organization of people around a central belief system is his like primary indictment that he's making. That is just about control, and and that's why he wants it to be the one true religion is control and manipulating people and proving to them that he's been doing it the entire time.
And it's interesting too, because nothing about their particular organization is ever depicted as being bad or wrong or anything like that. Like
Topher Grace is trying to rescue them the entire time.
They're depicted as being basically good people. Topher Grace is this super nice guy.
Yeah.
And the character, not only the movie, the characters in the movie are hyper self-aware, because again, before all the major events start, when they're just, they're either sitting on the bench or they're walking to or from the bench, one of them even says to the other, because they're Mormons, even says to the other, yeah, we got kind of like made fun of in that South Park thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's so great.
And the other one says, yeah, I heard some of those songs are pretty funny.
Yeah.
And they're these like reasonable, rational.
Yes.
Like what I think is great is from the very beginning, you see the nuance of human existence. Even inside an organization, people can have different levels of
No one's
belief.
Perspective in this movie lives in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Like everybody is aware of everything else going on around them, which, at one point was so rare in horror movies that people would jokingly reference it in horror movies. Like you'd be in a zombie movie in the 90s or the early 2000s and somebody would say something like, have you never seen a zombie movie before?
Yeah.
This is kind of the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, and I think that is, again, kind of the benefit of not having a lot of money, is your writing just has to be better. You have to have a higher level of quality of dialogue and script. And I will say they also did a ton of great camera work. The camera work is fantastic. The cinematography is really good. The set design is incredible. They're in this why was everything wet? The only thing I understand is like literally this house is falling apart. All of his like books are all wet. And
I love the set design of the set design. Like the fact that he's got the miniature of the house. So here's my theory about why the house is soaking wet and it's falling apart. Because as anybody who lives in a home or owns a home knows, you need to do upkeep on your home
Constantly.
or eventually stuff gets in from outside. I actually think that question effectively gets answered inside the movie because he's spent all the time that a normal person would spend on the upkeep of the outside of their house excavating underneath their house. I don't think he's done any work on the part of the house that you can see.
Yeah.
And also, again, because you can't pay a contractor to come in and build your murder room for you.
This is true, yeah.
If you've run a bunch of weird, sketchy, like sprinkler systems down to your sub basement.
Yep, and door locking mechanisms. And
then
weird...
that crap has to, but I mean, that the water dispersal specifically, that has to be coming from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, he even puts, it's funny because he's got a leak in one of the corners of like the kind of, I guess it's like a nave that he's built. It's almost like religious, like, it's weird because the house is a hexagon. It's hexagonally shaped. It's very interesting. Like the house is built as a hexagon. It's very
It
weird.
feels like the front of the house is meant to be, it's meant to appear to be a facade of a house, right? So it's meant to look from the street. Like when they first see the house is set back like a good 30 or 40 feet from the curb. And it's meant to look like the front of a fairly normal house. The one thing you do notice about the house is the windows are exceedingly small.
Yeah, and all weirdly shaped too. They're like,
yeah, they're almost all like tiny little, I always forget what you call them, but like
it's a hexagon.
Yeah, but so they've got the tiny little hexagon windows. But then once you get back past that, yeah, the house starts to narrow and it takes on that hexagonal shape that you're talking about. Because the whole front, it's literally like a movie facade. It's literally like you walked onto a movie lot and there's no house behind the house. It's just that. And effectively, the only part of the house that is a normal house is that front entrance room.
Yeah, it's like this like foyer basically that they move into when they first come into the house. And then there's something about like, you can tell it was a house he bought from some elderly person because all the fixtures are like these 1950s fixtures.
Yeah.
There's a light timer, which
Yeah,
I
he's got
found
the
very
crank
interesting. He's
timers
got the
for the
crank
lights.
timers for the lights. So like, and I literally have seen those in real life. Like my grandparents had crank timers where like you would come into a room that you know you were going to be in for a while. And the light switch was literally like an egg timer. You would twist it and turn it on.
I will say, for anybody who's not familiar with this and doesn't believe this is a real thing, the activity room at a Michael's. That's the light switch in all the activity rooms at Michael's like that.
Still, even today, it's like that. That's crazy. That's so funny that that's still like that. So I do think that this movie is a byproduct of, and I don't want to say elevated horror, because honestly, some of these horror movies that are getting made now that have big actors and stuff in them still have pretty decent budgets, like $40-50 million. But this movie's budget was not a huge budget to get three incredibly talented actors to do a very small set, like dialed in.
And it feels like it's straddling a line very comfortably between horror and true crime.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah. So, what did you think of the movie in the end? Recommend?
I thought it was amazing. Like I texted you before I'd left the theater.
You did. Heretic is amazing.
Yeah, my daughter and I watched it. She was like, she just wanted to go see a movie, and I let her pick. And I'd seen trailers, but I kind of wasn't really, I was like, we'll see it or we won't see it. Yeah. Boy, am I glad we saw it. Like this is, I'm trying to think of a better movie I've seen this year. Like this was super well written. It was super satisfying. Again, not to get hyper specific, but every moment during the movie where I thought, oh, that's a plot hole, that's a mistake, that's something that they edited something else out where you're not going to get resolution. All of that stuff got tied up. Like it was one of the tightest movies I think I've ever seen.
It's funny because I almost, as a reaction to that, got more like, no, there's going to be something. There's going to be something. I like my brain started I'm trying to look for it. I'm like, I'm always smarter in the movies. I always figure this stuff. And I couldn't get it this time around, which I really
We talked about the fact there's one moment where there's a super early plant for a payoff.
There's a plant payoff. Yeah.
And like, honestly, in that moment, I literally physically threw my hands up. I'm like, you're giving it away. But it's really minor because it has nothing to do with really the story. And again, the movie is about the story.
Yeah.
And all the things that you may, because they're like, if you're like me, there's going to be a point where you're like, no, that's the hole. That's the thing Jay missed. How did he not notice that? And then 5 minutes later, you're going to realize, no, nothing got missed.
Nothing got missed. It was all there. It was all, they tied it all up. So yeah, I definitely don't recommend this movie too. I do hope that more people go to see it that might have just been turned off by the premise.
Yeah.
Because really it is more of a 90s true crime with religious overtones.
And I think,
it doesn't take any kind of messaging on that itself. It's the premise and setup for the fun and games part of this crime story.
And I think the fact that, it's easier to market a movie as a horror movie.
Yep.
The fact that the title of the movie is Heretic.
Yep.
Right? Like there's a lot of things where from the outside looking in, you're going to look at it and think, no, I'm sure you guys are just whitewashing it.
Right.
But really it isn't. Like it really, it's a very satisfying, you said Agatha Christie style suspense story. And the characters are all really engaging. Like at different points in the movie, even when Hugh Grant starts to turn into weird creepo dude, you'll still see certain things from his perspective.
Yeah.
Which is a good trick, right? Because like the whole thing, I forget who it was years ago. I remember hearing some actor say, the trick to playing a good villain is that you never see yourself as the villain.
That's it. Yeah.
Right?
I think he's a bad guy.
And again, well written, well performed, well shot. It's probably the best movie I've seen this year.
I think the writing's so good to me because there's moments where I felt myself being convinced by his arguments, and then they would have Sister Barnes be like, no, that's reductive because this, and this, and like poke holes in his arguments. And I was like, I was going back and forth between their POVs, which I found so compelling.
And I love the fact that because early on in the film, she's set up as the one who maybe her faith is breaking,
yeah,
but she won't accept his reductive, lazy, superficial arguments to any of that stuff. It's really well done because she doesn't come at it from the point of view of somebody who's like, no, my faith is the answer to this, therefore your argument's invalid. It's like, no, your argument's invalid because that's great.
And because she's more worldly than Sister Paxton, she's also doing it consciously knowing that the longer she defies him, that he wants her capitulation.
Yes.
And so her defiance is also a survival tactic in the world that she's in because she's just this more worldly
character. Because she straight up tells Sister Paxton that around the halfway point.
And what's really funny, and that's where I think you really start to see the ships in the night part of their two characters diverging, where both of them have faith. One of them is continuously growing into the structure of the religion she's part of. The other one is exiting it.
Yes.
Where like her faith is still strong and still important, but she doesn't need the structure of the religion to have her faith. The other one's faith has been challenged, but needs the structure of, you know what I mean? So they're going different directions when it's all over. And one's having their faith reinforced while the other's having their faith.
And again, neither of those things is depicted as good or bad.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. It's just, again, it's just the kind of the setup for the movie and where we're at like in the story. So I would highly recommend it. One of the things I want to start doing we just watched was trailers at the end because we both saw some cool trailers and
one not so cool trailer. A trailer so bad it offended me and had the same impact on me as a slight head injury.
What's funny about that trailer? Yeah, it's true because you forgot the other movie.
I forgot the trailer I saw before that because it was so bad. It was so bad.
So we saw two good trailers and one bad trailer. The first trailer that we both saw was the Nosferatu.
Yes.
The new Nosferatu, which is David Eggers,
yeah,
who made Hereditary, and I'm fucking stoked.
It looks amazing. It looks amazing.
It's funny because, and you pointed out to me that that Nosferatu is just
copyright friendly Dracula. So for anybody who doesn't know, because the original Nosferatu was 1922, it was an F.W. Murnau movie, and basically F.W. Murnau made a movie called Nosferatu where the lead character is called Count Orlok because he couldn't secure the rights to Dracula. So it's just Dracula. The characters just have different names and the vampire's ugly. Yep. Other than that, it's Dracula.
It's the same story. It's about a real estate agent whose wife starts to get harassed by a vampire. And the vampire, weirdly this time, isn't played by Willem Dafoe. He plays the analog to Van Helsing.
So yeah, Willem Dafoe, there was a movie called Shadow of the Vampire.
Where he played the Nosferatu.
Which is about the making of the 1922 Nosferatu, where Willem Dafoe plays the vampire as an actual vampire. Yeah. He Willem Dafoe's the crap out of that.
he's extra Willem Dafoe in that movie, but he's playing Max Schreck, who's an actor at the time, but the conceit of the movie is that he was really a vampire.
Yes.
It's actually a documentary.
That's why he's the perfect vampire for that.
Yeah. It looks fantastic. I'm excited about that one. Then we saw the trailer for the whatchamacallit. It's not Mike Flanagan. It's the new guy who did Long Legs, Oz Perkins. The new Oz Perkins, the monkey.
I have no recollection of this.
It left your mind
It left my mind through no fault of its own. I have no
because
recollection
of the third
this.
thing that we watched. Well, I think it looks
You
fantastic.
talk about this thing, and I'll talk about the third thing angrily and loudly.
So The Monkey is a Skeleton Crew short story from Stephen King. Skeleton Crew, by the way, if you ever want a greatest hits of his short stories, is probably the greatest short story collection he ever wrote that isn't the Bachman books. Because the 4 Bachman short stories, which are, first of all, one of our favorite movies, The Running Man, followed by The Long Walk, which is also getting, Mike Flanagan's making The Long Walk, which is going to be insane. Because The Long Walk is, imagine Survivor, but like more horrifying. Because you just walk until you die.
Yeah.
You literally just walk until you die. But The Monkey is it's a monkey's paw analog, basically.
Yeah.
You get this thing that like makes your wishes come true in horrifying ways. And it looks completely unhinged. There was like just a town unraveling basically because of it's kind of a prototype Needful Things where people start making wishes and they come true in terrible ways. But it looks really, really good, and I love.
I gotta rewatch Needful Things. That movie's so good. I love that movie.
Who's the made-for-TV one? Who plays the devil in that?
Oh no, was there a made-for-TV one?
Yeah, there was a made-for-TV one.
I thought that was just a theatrical release. You talking about Max von Sydow as the devil?
Yeah, this is made-for-TV. Pretty sure it was like an ABC movie.
Oh yeah, sure, because Ed Harris was the main character. Ed Harris not showing up for a made-for-TV movie.
Ed Harris is absolutely showing up for a made-for-TV movie. In 1997, when that was made, guaranteed Ed Harris showed up.
Wasn't that after The Rock?
No. It was after The Abyss. Anyway, so I am sure that one's going to be good too. And then the third one.
Okay, so I'm not joking, and I'm not playing it up for the camera. I had completely forgotten that first trailer because when I saw these movies in these trailers before the movie, the second trailer I saw, and I'm watching this with my 17-year-old daughter, and my 17-year-old daughter has a high tolerance, and so do I, for that matter, has a high tolerance for bad horror movies,
for garbage,
for absolute garbage.
Yeah.
This bothered me so much. I was like literally turning to her in the theater, like, "This is awful. This looks terrible." So it was.
They already made this movie.
It was for a movie called Heart Eyes. And I literally, between the time the trailer started playing and the time the movie started playing, had to. This is my, why kids don't want to listen to their parents. Like, I'm telling my daughter something. She's like, "Dad, I don't give a crap at all." I went on this rant about how horror movies don't make money off the movies anymore.
Yeah.
They just make movies off having iconic images that can then be put on merchandise.
Yeah.
So this is just a god-awful looking slasher movie where the killer has heart-shaped cutouts in their face where their eyes should be.
He's a murderous heart eyes emoji. That's what he is.
All I could think was, you only did that so you have like something to print on crap. This looks horrible. It looks horrible. And it made me, literally made me forget the trailer before it. I got so worked up.
Yeah.
Horrible!
It was really something. It looks just like a remake of My Bloody Valentine, which was a movie from like the early 2000s.
But worse!
Well, at least the guy from My Bloody Valentine was like a miner, I think. Wasn't he like some kind of like coal miner or some shit with like a gas mask or something? Like he was... Anyway,
we should stop before I get you demonetized. I was so angry.
All right, well then in that case we will. So yeah, Hard Eyes episode when I guess we're gonna have to go see hate watch Hard Eyes.
Right after I watch Rebel Moon Part 2. That'll be when I watch Hard Eyes.
I still haven't seen Rebel Moon Part 2 either. I haven't watched it at all, or the like rated R cut, which apparently also exists. Yeah, no, fuck that completely. There we go, guys. We just watched Heretic. You should too.
You should. You really should.
It's a fine film. It's very well written, and it satisfies all the criteria for Grimdark because it is so ambiguous at the end and leaves you with more questions than answers.
The ending is very similar to the ending of The Descent, where you could see it in a couple different ways. So you can be hopeful and optimistic, or you can not.
And it's totally up to you. And I love movies that do that. It's definitely fit my criteria of challenge. Like it does with like that vastness of like a Lovecraftian story with concepts, what other sort of like media would do with like the vastness of space or a black hole or like that idea of like the infinite, right?
And the big thing for me, and I feel like we should call this out more often, it does the same thing for me that the Fallout series did, where it gives you credit as an audience member. It doesn't spoon feed you stuff.
Yeah.
It gives you credit for being a thinking person who wants to absorb the movie.
Yeah, more of that, please. I would
Yes,
love
please.
more. I would love more of that, please. So anyway, we'll see you for more Grimdark Media, hopefully in the future. Till then, I'm Ashes Jay.